So today, this is actually gonna be a two-part, maybe even a three-part series on the purchase sales agreement. And it's gonna be a little bit different in that we are going to be going through the purchase and sales agreement, and talking about how we talk clients through it. It's one thing to send a purchase sales agreement over to a client and have them initial it. It's quite another thing when you have somebody who actually reads it, or if you sit down with them and you try to explain the different components of the purchase sales agreement and what they mean. And so that's going to be the next couple weeks of helping you to have a script or a dialogue or a conversation around the different parts of the purchase sales agreement. And I'm specifically referring to the Form 21, not necessarily the addendums that come along with it. But there's some things in the Form 21 that are really important for you to be able to explain to your clients, so that when they are signing this, it's not just tapping on a computer screen or clicking with a mouse and blindly signing something, but you need to be able to explain to them the different paragraphs and the implications behind those paragraphs. So that's what we're going to be covering today. Does that make sense to everybody? Do we know where we're going?
Yep.
So what I'd like you to do, if you're able to do that, if you're on your laptop, if you're on your phone, I realize you won't be able to do it, but if you're on your laptop or desktop computer, what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to split the screen on your computer and pull up alongside you, or have a printed version of it. And you can have an old copy of a transaction. It doesn't have to be a brand new one, but what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to have out in front of you a copy of the purchase sales agreement, Form 21, okay? Because I want you to be able to look at that, and we're going to be talking through that, all right? So if you want to go ahead and take a moment here and pull one up or pull one out. If you're like me, sometimes you have a hard copy sitting around and you can just grab one of those, okay? Let me get my screen ordered here a little bit better. All right, so if you've had an opportunity to fill out a purchase sale agreement and walk a client through it, when we're looking at the front page has all these blank spaces in there, right? And that hopefully you, with the guidance of your buyer, you know how much money they want to pay for the property. You've got a price, you've got an amount of earnest money, things that are included in that they're going to ask to go along with the house, who the title company and escrow company is going to be, things like that. And then at the bottom of the sheet has all of their personal information, as well as the listing broker and selling broker's information. Aside from all of that stuff, just looking at the front of the purchase sales agreement, what's one of the things that you look at and you go, man, that just doesn't make any sense to me, or what does that mean, or why is it that way? Does anybody have anything when they look at that just leaves you scratching your head and you wonder, if somebody asked me about that, I'm not too certain I can tell them why it's that way. Anybody have anything? What about the offer expiration date. Can somebody give me a reason for the offer expiration date?
So the offer expiration date for me is a way you can maintain control. You can use it to, in a market like this, you can use it to say, hey, we need your offer response quickly because there's a lot of different houses in the market. And if you go past this offer expiration date, even though a lot of people ignore it, hey, you know, we're not bound by it and we can move down the road and keep shopping.
Right. Yeah, because buyer may not want an offer sitting out there a number of days for seller to come back at their convenience or whenever they feel like it and accept an offer and then suddenly put the buyer under contract when perhaps buyer's moved on and has already made an offer on another house, right? One of the things that we work with a lot in contract law is timelines. Every contract needs to have a start date and an end date. And this offer expiration date, sometimes that gets confused with the date of the contract, right? So when at the top of every addendum that's included with a contract, it says this is part of the contract dated. And what I've seen people, agents put there is the expiration date, not the contract date. So you'll notice at the top of the purchase sales agreement, the date of the contract is the first date. Then you have the MLS number, and then the second one is the offer expiration date. And I guess it would be helpful if I shared my screen. I thought I was sharing my screen, but I guess I'm not, am I? So let me share my screen here with you so you can see this. So whenever there's a reference to the contract, it's typically referenced to the contract date. That is not the expiration date. It's always this date on the right. So whenever we see an addendum that's added later on to the contract, this addendum is part of the contract dated. The date that it's referring to is this date right here on the left. Okay, the offer expiration date, just Brian is right. It helps emphasize to the seller that time is of the essence, that there is a particular time to which this offer is on the table. After that, the offer is not on the table anymore, right? So let's say we write a contract today. Today's the 27th, and we make the offer good. It's going to expire on Friday the 29th, right? How long on the 29th does the seller have to respond?
Is it 9 p.m.?
9 p.m. is, yes, great. 9 p.m. is pretty much the boilerplate language time that's always in our contracts, and we'll see that a little later on. Here's the thing that you might not be aware of. Could it be any other time besides 9 p.m.?
Sure, if you write it.
Yeah, exactly right, Richard. Yes, if you write it. So I can put in here, if you put your, if when you're writing the contract, if you put it in here, put your mouse in there and then hit the space button, you'll notice it turns green. Do you see that? And then I can type in 5 p.m. on 5/29/2020. Now I've changed the time, because who wants to sit up till 9 o'clock at night figuring out if the sellers are going to accept your offer or not, right? Maybe you're one of those people that go to bed earlier, right? So you can change the time on that. You might have people who are, this has happened to me, you might have people who are traveling through town and they're getting on the flight to head back to the East Coast, and they need to know before they leave town on the airplane. Does that make sense? So you're able to change the time of that offer expiration period of time. All right. Here's a snag that often catches agents in the MLS compliance department. If you get an email from Ann Jeanette, is the tax parcel number. And for some oddball reason, even if you're off by one number, and it gets put in the MLS wrong, we get a notification of it. And unfortunately, you can't change it. Only your managing broker or designated broker can change that, right? Is there something else on the front of this form that often catches you unawares, or you don't quite understand, or you wish you had a better grasp of why you fill it out the way it's supposed to be filled out? Does everybody understand the purpose of line 16? Or actually lines, right? I see a lot of agents that leave that blank. There's arguments both ways of why it should be filled in and why it could be left blank. Can somebody give me a reason why an agent wouldn't include on there the addenda that are supposed to be attached to the purchase and sale agreement? Can you give me a reason why you wouldn't put that on there? Anybody? Think of a good reason? Come on, Brian, you got to have a good reason.
I always put all my addenda on there. I think if somebody doesn't, they're hiding something.
It could be hiding something. Yeah. What's the danger of not putting the addenda that are to be included in the contract on there?
Well, the agent on their side of the deal could literally pull an addendum out, sign the rest of the contract, and send it back without that addenda, and potentially pull a fast one on you because there's no listing of what all should be included.
There's no record of all the addenda that should be included. Yeah. So they could pull out an addenda that you attach to this purchase sale agreement and send it back to you, and you may not be aware of it until later in the game. What would be another reason, a good reason for making sure that all of the addenda that are to be attached to line 16 or to the purchase sale agreement are included on that line 16? What would be another good reason? Who else has to receive this? Who else is going to receive the purchase sales agreement that might be good for them to know what addenda are attached to it?
The sellers themselves?
Okay, the sellers themselves. We're sending over an offer. Yeah, they need to make sure that all of the pieces of the contract are there that buyer intended to go along with that. That's good. Yes, very good. Who else?
The big two for me are the lender and the title company.
Lender and the title company, right? So the lender has to have a complete contract in order to make application for a loan, right? That's the final piece they need for that loan application. And they need to have assurance that they have all the parts of the contract attached. How are they going to know that? Well, this line 16 serves notice of that these are the parts of the contract included in the purchase sales agreement. title is also, it's also important for title because remember that the purchase and sales agreement are also instructions to the title company about conducting the closing of the contract, right? And so title also needs to know. So you have the seller needs to know, the buyer's lender needs to know, and the title company and escrow company need to know all the different parts of the contract. So I can't really think of a really good reason why you wouldn't want to include all the addenda on there. Now, there are a couple things that sometimes come up that agents will list in there that are not necessary. For instance, the 22K is already listed on line 12, and it says that it's requested. Attach the Northwest MLS Form 22K. Do you see that on line 12? Okay. We don't need to put that on line 16 because it's already on the front page here that that's going to be included. The Exhibit A up on line 4, legal description attached as Exhibit A, right? I've seen agents who will list that down here on line 16 also. Not needed because it's already specified here that the Exhibit A is going to be attached. The 22K identification of utilities is going to be attached. Some other items that often get listed on there that shouldn't be listed in there on there is anything that is not part of the contract. Can you think of things that are not part of the contract that sometimes could be listed on that line? Can you give me an example of what that might be? What's not part of the contract that often just gets thrown all together? I see it all the time. Is the seller's disclosures part of the contract? No. Seller's disclosure is not part of the contract. Should not be listed there in the addenda line. What else could be included in all the paperwork?
Law of real estate agency.
Law of real estate agency should not be listed there. It's not part of the contract, right? So there are some things that you're going to have your buyer sign or initial that are not part of the contract. If it does not say at the top of the addenda, this is part of the contract dated, it doesn't go there. All right, so it will tell you at the top of the form if it should be attached to this, all right? Now, one extra step before we move on here is that sometimes if you're the listing agent representing the seller and you get the contract and the seller wants to write a counter offer, and we use Form 36 for that, right? Instead of scribbling all over this page, unless there's like just one simple change, we want to use the counteroffer addendum, Form 36. If you send that back over, that Form 36, best practices is that on this line 16, you include in big bold letters, see counteroffer. That way, that puts on notice the buyer, when you return it, buyer's lender, and the title company that they should see a counteroffer addenda attached to the Form 36. Does that make sense? So my recommendation is there's a bunch of different ways to do it, but if you're going to make like a price change, you can X out or cross out the price and just put C counteroffer addendum and then put the new price, the counteroffer price, on the counteroffer price addendum. The advantage of that is I've seen where, let's say the property's $350,000 and the buyer comes in and says, we're going to offer you $325,000. The seller crosses that out and the seller writes above that $345,000 and initials it. Buyer comes back and says, well, I'm not agreeing to 345. And so they scratch that out, and then they put in there 330. Goes back to seller. Seller says, well, I'm not agreeing to 330. They scratch that out, and then they put 340. How many times do you have to scratch that out before somebody says, you know what? Let's just use the counteroffer addendum that's so conveniently provided for us by Northwest MLS forms, right? I have literally seen this whole line filled up with numbers and initials because everybody crosses it out, initials it, crosses it out, initials it, crosses it out. After a while, I can't decide who initialed what, where, when, right? So that's the nice thing about using the counteroffer addendum is it keeps everything clean and orderly, okay? Any questions about the front page? I didn't want to spend a lot of time on that, but I did want to cover a couple of those key things that I often see on the compliance side. Okay, so let's look at the second page, and we're not going to get very far apparently today, but we'll get as far as we can. We're just going to go through these paragraphs here. So I'm going to give you just a couple minutes. I want you to read this paragraph A for me, if you will do that. It seems like you can blow that up a little bit. If you're reading it from my screen, you should be able to read a lot easier.
Heck, Ron, that's easier to read your screen than it is to read the paper in front of me right now.
Really?
You got it blown up pretty well.
That's good. Okay. Yeah, I want to give you a minute or two here to read this. Okay, so can somebody give me, like, there's two major things in this paragraph that are monstrously huge for buyer to understand when they're writing an offer on a house. Can somebody throw out one of those? What is something really important? If you're sitting in front of your buyer and you're filling this out, what is something in this paragraph you need to make sure your buyer understands?
That if they don't have cash to close, then we're going to need specific documentation giving evidence that they have funds to pay it another way.
Correct. Yes. So that's a huge one, right? That right there in line 1 and 2, unless otherwise specified in this agreement, buyer represents a buyer has sufficient funds to close this sale in accordance with this agreement, right? And is not relying on contingent source of funds. Okay? So that's the reason we have the finance addendum, right? The 22A. Finance addendum discloses to the seller, Mr. Seller, I do not have the cash in the bank right now. I am relying upon a loan. I am relying upon financing. And this is the kind of financing I'm getting. This is how much money I'm putting down. And within 5 days of mutual acceptance, I'm going to make full application for the loan. And by the way, I'm giving you permission. I'm asking you to check in on me to make sure that I'm following through on this. And here are the forms that you can use to do that. Oh, and by the way, I might need some help with some down payment assistance.
Closing costs, yeah.
Closing costs, right? Okay. So, yeah, that's great, Natalie. That's the first one. Okay, what's another one in here?
One that always pops out to me, it might not be what you're looking for, but it is the caution against wiring funds in our current environment, particularly with COVID. I feel that's an even bigger caution.
Yeah, that's a huge one. And actually, a lot of agents, and I'm one of them, there is a notice that the Washington realtors that you can include and give to your buyers not to wire funds until they are directly told to by their title and escrow company, and it's verified, right? And so that's huge. The parties shall use caution when wiring funds to avoid potential wire fraud. Before wiring funds, the party wiring funds shall take steps to confirm any wire instructions via an independently verified phone number and other appropriate measures. Puts the buyer on notice right there, okay? There's one other thing in here. And that's a good one, Brian. But there's one other thing in here that's really important for your buyer to understand.
Well, I do see the gift funds, retirement, future earnings, and sale of other property. I mean, there's several other addendum other than the financing addendum. Evidence of funds pops into mind that maybe grandma is going to give you the money to buy the house, so you're not getting a loan, but you're using evidence of funds.
Yeah, so it's very important that you're able to explain to your buyer the difference between non-contingent funds and contingent funds, right? What are contingent funds? Or maybe we should start the other way. What are non-contingent funds? It's not relying on any contingent funds.
That would be the gifts or from, like, if somebody was giving it to them. Is it because what's contingent on them actually getting approved for the loan at that purchase price?
Yeah. Non-contingent funds are hard cash that they have readily available that they can go to the bank and get.
Mm-hmm.
That's non-contingent funds. So I'm able to go to the bank, withdraw the funds, and give it to you right now. There's no contingency. Pretty much all other kinds of funds are contingent. A loan is contingent. That's why we have a finance addendum. We use the 22EF, the evidence of funds, to disclose to the seller, oh, by the way, I'm relying on a gift from grandma, okay? I'm relying upon my mom and dad giving me money. I'm relying upon, selling the 1952 Chevy in the Quonset hut out back. I'm relying on drawing from my 401k, and those aren't readily available. It's going to take me a little bit of time to work through my retirement funds to get my retirement funds out, right? Any funds that are not immediately available are contingent funds.
Now, how does the sale of an existing home play into that? Does the addendum for the purchase being contingent on the buyer's sale of their own property, does that have its own language to classify where we have these funds? So that's a different thing than the evidence of funds.
Correct. Very good. Yeah. So we have the buyer's contingent property that's already under contract. And for that, we use the 22Q. I don't know why it's a Q, but it is. And there's also the buyer's contingent property that needs to be put on the market. That's the 22B. In other words, buyers communicating to the seller, my purchase is contingent upon me selling my home, and I haven't put it on the market yet. That's the 22B. I have 5 days after mutual acceptance to get my home on the market and get it in the MLS, okay? So those are contingent funds. It's contingent upon me selling my home. Or it's contingent, the 22Q, it's contingent upon me completing the sale of my home. It's already under contract. Maybe the best case scenario is the home inspection's already done. So when I'm working with somebody who's thinking about doing a contingent, I really encourage them, let's get your home under contract, get through the inspection period. That way your offer is that much stronger, because there's not an opportunity of something falling apart during the home inspection, which is one of the more common ways that that can happen. So yeah, Natalie, that's perfect. Yes, those are contingent funds, all right? And you notice that it gives some examples here, but this is not an exhaustive list. Sale of another property, gifts, retirement, future earnings, anything that is outside of cash that's readily available, okay? Perfect, great. Let's go to earnest money. This is a big paragraph, and so I want to break it down into the two parts of the paragraph. So I'm going to give you a minute here to read the first paragraph, line 7 through 21. Read that paragraph, and then we're gonna talk about that here. And there's a couple things in here that I want you to pick up on. Okay, so there's a big section in the middle of this that talks about earnest money over $10,000 and selling firms having, or firms period, having their own escrow accounts and what to do with the interest and things like that. I'm not going to get into that. Our firm doesn't have a trust account. We don't handle that. We don't have to worry about the Form W-9 and the interest that's earned off this. Years ago, most real estate firms got out of that whole deal because of the liability issues surrounding that, and the complications with the bookkeeping. There's only a couple firms that I'm aware of in the Tri-Cities here anyway that still hold on to earnest money funds. So outside of that, the big middle section, there's a couple things that are really, really important for buyer to understand. Can you give me one of those? Probably the big one is right at the top, right? And that's the delivery of earnest money. Can you explain to me the delivery of earnest money? Anybody, doesn't matter. Just jump right in there.
So basically, if the
My computer completely froze up. I didn't hear the last question you asked.
So I'm asking to explain to the buyer,
What's going on?
let's say I'm the buyer, explain to me the delivery of earnest money and how that should happen. Did you freeze up again? Looks like you froze up again. Natalie froze up again.
I think she did. Basically, the buyer has 2 days after mutual acceptance to deliver the earnest money. However, if the realtor takes possession of the earnest money and uses the correct form, that becomes 3 days.
Okay. 3 days. So in 3 days, either after mutual acceptance or 3 days after receipt of the earnest money funds, whichever is later, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that sometimes trips people up. Here's the thing that is required and that's important for you to understand, to be able to explain to your buyer. That delivery of earnest money funds is critically important. right? It can make their contract voidable if they do not deliver in a timely manner. So it's very important for you to emphasize to the buyers that they need to get that earnest. Now, my practice is I like to have them deliver the earnest money themselves. They learn where the title and escrow company is, and they go in, they deliver the check. The title and escrow company, I tell them, will give them a receipt, and that receipt I will get a copy of that receipt. Okay. However, having said that, there are times when they're out of town or they're going to be on vacation or whatever, and so they will give me, the realtor, their earnest money when they write the offer. Then we go under mutual acceptance, and I have 3 days to deliver that. If you accept earnest money funds, you have to provide a receipt of when you receive those funds. The number one thing that the Department of Licensing will always look at when they audit files is this very thing. And it's the number one place that firms and agents get fined, is the timeline of when earnest money was received and when earnest money was delivered. So if you receive the earnest money funds, you have to give them, we use the Form 89, an earnest money receipt, and then you will have the time, the 3 days, to deliver it to the title company and escrow company, and you will get a receipt from them, and you will have both those receipts in your file. Does that make sense? Okay.
Yes.
At the end of this paragraph, there's an important notice for your buyer to understand. What is that?
Are you talking about the bad check?
Yeah,
Notice?
bad check. Now, this has probably never happened to any of you people, but it's happened to me. Right? So there's the notice that says the closing agent provides a written verification of the receipt of earnest money, and also if the check is not honored. There's a, what do they call it? Lack of fund, not lack of funds.
Insufficient funds.
Insufficient funds. Thank you. And that has to be delivered to all parties in writing, right? And that needs to be kept in your file. And hopefully your buyers will be able to correct that and make good on that with another check or cashier's check or something, right? In what form can earnest money be delivered to the title and escrow company? Or maybe
check or wire.
Wire, check, cashier's check. Says that I'm unstable. No kidding.
It's you, not me.
Cash will not be accepted because it can't be traced. I don't know when U.S. currency stopped becoming legal tender, but in the United States, U.S. currency is not legal tender in many cases anymore when it comes to legal transactions, right? Okay, let's deal with the second paragraph here, and then we're going to finish out this evening. I'm going to give you just a minute here to read this, and then we're going to point out one particular thing that's really important in this paragraph.
I'm having issues, Ron. I'm not able to.
Not able to see it?
Well, I'm just having issues with my connection.
Yeah, mine's been kind of jerky too. Okay, so this second paragraph is kind of it serves as kind of a warning. And if you're new to this, it's really important that you understand this. Hi, Natalie. Welcome back.
Weird internet issues in Walla Walla today. It's been a weird internet day.
Has it? Well, it has been here too. In
Yeah.
fact, I've gotten a couple different notices that says I'm unstable, and I've made a joke about that. So.
I was about to make a joke about that, so I'm glad you did too.
So we were talking about earnest money, the timely deliver, 2 days if the buyers deliver it, 3 days if they give it to the agent has 3 days if they receive it. And that there's notice that receipts need to be made by all parties that touch the earnest money check. And if the earnest money check bounces, there needs to be written notice of that as well. Now, that probably doesn't happen a lot, but it did happen to me, and I didn't know about that, and it became a kind of a thing. So the second paragraph here concerning this earnest money is not a fun paragraph, but it's very important for you to know. We've had two agents who, two of our transactions, agents in our office who had to go into interpleader action over earnest money. And so it's very important that you understand that there is a process if the parties are in disagreement of who deserves earnest money or who has breached the contract. There is a formal process that they will go through. And that's what this second paragraph deals with, is the settlement for earnest money when there's a conflict, right? So if this earnest money is terminated in normal proceedings, the closing agent can release the earnest money, but there needs to be something in writing. And so there's typically two forms we use. Number one is the Form 50 that typically goes with a notice, and it's just the simple release of earnest money funds where both parties sign that the earnest money is going to be released back to whoever, or maybe it's going to be split. But typically it's all released back to the buyer if the buyer's given timely notice for whatever, the home inspection or title review or whatever else that could be in the contract. It's a contingency. Maybe it's the finance contingency. They made a good faith effort to get a loan but didn't qualify for a loan. Could be that. Typically that's when we use the Form 50. If the contract is rescinded, then we use the Form 51. And that form is the rescission and return of earnest money, and that's what that form is for. So typically it's one of those two forms that releases earnest money and instructs the title and escrow company who to deliver the earnest money to. But this paragraph deals with instances when there is not agreement about who deserves to get the earnest money. Buyer and seller are now arguing over who's going to get earnest money. So the parties shall execute such form and deliver the same to the closing agent. If either party fails to execute the release form, a party may make a written demand to the closing agent, the title and escrow company, for the earnest money, right? And there's an RCW, Revised Code of Washington, that addresses this whole thing, right? So it's in law. Closing agent shall deliver notice of the demand that the one party made to the other party, letting them know that they're going to release the earnest money, right? Within 15 days. And if the other party doesn't object to the demand within 20 days, then the earnest money is released. So there's quite a bit of a timeline here that everybody has to work with, all right? Closing agent shall disperse the earnest money to the party making the demand within 10 days of the expiration of the 20-day period. So we have 20 days. Within 10 days after that, earnest money will be released. If the closing agent timely receives an objection, so one party says, we want the earnest money, the title company sends over a notice to the other party, buyer or seller, doesn't matter, and they don't respond after 15 days, then they release earnest money. But if the other party objects, then there's a whole nother level that goes on here. If it receives an objection or an inconsistent demand, let's say the other party demands the earnest money. So now you got two demands for the earnest money, right? Unless the parties provide subsequent consistent instructions. In other words, both parties have to come to agreement. And sometimes that agreement is they're going to split the earnest money, not always 50-50, but something. A lot of times that's what it comes down to, all right? Consistent instructions to the closing agent to disperse the earnest money or refrain from commencing an interpleader action for a specified period of time pursuant to the revised Coast of Washington. The parties consent, automatically consent to service of the summons and complaint for an interpleader action. In other words, what the title company says, we're not dealing with it. If you guys can't agree, we're automatically going to turn this whole situation over to an interpleader action by first-class mail. Postage prepaid at the party's usual mailing address or deemed to have released closing agent from any and all claims or liability related to the dispersal of the earnest money. Title company's washing their hands. Now it's going to go to interpleader. If either party fails to authorize release of the earnest money to the other party when required to do so under this agreement, that party shall be in breach of this agreement. For the purpose of this section, the term closing agent includes the selling firm holding the earnest money. So if there's a firm holding the earnest money, it includes them. Parties authorize the party commencing an interpleader action to deduct up to $500 of costs thereof. So if you have $1,000 earnest money and the parties are fighting over it, now my experience has been is when this has been put in place, the title companies have taken all $500. So how much sense does it make to have earnest money at $500? It doesn't make much sense in my mind. It doesn't even cover the interpleader costs because the title and escrow company can take that right off the top. So if the earnest money is $1,000, automatically $500 you can just count on. If it goes to interpleader, $500 of that is going to automatically go to the title company. And by the way, that comes off the top. That's just part of the action of the process. The buyer and seller don't get a say in whether the title company gets paid or not. They automatically get those funds. So now buyer and seller are fighting over $500 left of the $1,000 earnest money check. You see how kind of crazy this can get, right? So there's one reason why it's really good to make sure that earnest money funds are sufficient to make sure that it covers all the liquidated damages. And part of that liquidated damages could be the interpleader action deduction that the title and escrow company could take of $500. All right. Oh my goodness. So I was hoping to get through this first page and we didn't. And I'm not going to take any more of your time. I hope that you got some ahas here. I hope that you have a little bit better clarity around these sections. We're going to continue this next week. We're going to do this. Now it looks like it's going to be a 3-part section. I was planning on doing this on 2 parts, but I think it's going to take us 3 parts to get through the purchase sales agreement. Because I really want our agents to be able to explain the sections of these forms and why these are important, so that when these things come up, they can come at it with a high level of knowledge and understanding of all the implications that this has for their buyers and their sellers. All right. Well, I appreciate you spending time with me, especially you, Natalie, with your household full of kids.
Thanks, Ron. I appreciate it.
Yeah. You guys enjoy the rest of your evening. And if you got any questions, text me, email me, get a hold of me. And I'm always available for one-on-one. If you got something a contract you want to go over with, we can jump on Zoom and we can walk through it, no problem. Right?
Thanks, Ron.
Thanks, Ron.
Yeah, you're welcome. You guys enjoy the rest of your evening.
You too.